Hi, everybody. Welcome to Alumless. It is Friday, June 9th. Thanks for joining us at our regular time, 11:30. I am Ryan Catherwood. That gentleman there sharing the screen with me is Chris Marshall. He is the founder, CEO, leader extraordinaire of Chris Marshall Advancement Consulting.
Yeah, how
Great
you
to do
doing?
another episode with you today, Chris.
I
How
saw
have
the
you
number
been?
26 on the screen right before, and I was like, wow, that's a lot of episodes we've done. It's
I
crazy.
know we've been doing this for a little while now, and I think I have a lot of fun with it. I know you do too, and
Yep.
we know the guests are just clamoring to get on the show, so we must be doing something right, you know. Uh,
Right.
that may not actually be true. There's not a lot of clamoring. I have to be honest.
Well, we're booked till through October, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, we're a modest but growing show here. If you're listening to us live, we'd be grateful if you'd say hello in the LinkedIn comments for the event. Just introduce yourself, say what school you work for, or if you work for another consulting practice or a different organization altogether. Just let us know that you're joining us. We do often get a great conversation going in the comments. And we can check in with you after the show. We are live today, so your questions will go right to myself, to Chris, or to our special guest, Dr. Angelique Grant, who will introduce just momentarily. But, I think a great topic for today's show, Chris, it's one that I think is worthy of exploring often. But, and we'll get into our topic around diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives with Dr. Grant here soon. But it's been a month since we had a show. We quickly headed into the summer months. It's a real busy stretch, I think, for folks in the alumni relations world, getting through commencement, getting through major spring reunion weekends, things of that nature. I think a lot of people just took a deep breath this week in our space, and rightfully so. But what projects have you been working on, and what are you most excited about as we head into the summer?
Yeah, there are still a few schools that are having their major reunion event, like starting today, this Friday, Saturday, and they'll end up on Sunday. So I think like next week, most of us in our field will be in that, okay, the rearview mirror, everything's behind and moving forward. But for us this summer, there's plenty of work to do. I do try, to be honest with you, turn the volume down a little bit on the peak level of work so that some of July and some of August I can have some family time because the school year is pretty busy. But I wrote a list of things that we're cooking, and it's not that small of a list. As I looked at it in totality, we have 4 schools that are wrapping up a strategic planning process with us: Denison, Buffalo, Delaware, and Temple. And I see Temple's on the call today. Shout out to Katie and the folks from there. We got a whole bunch of other folks: University of Washington and Lafayette on the line, Seattle, Guilford, and Shana from Jersey. Good to see everybody on. Thanks for joining in. I think we had a good list coming into this call, so I'm excited about that. So we have those strategic plans going. I'm working on our partner firm, Washburn McGoldrick, and I are working on feasibility studies with Gettysburg, Swarthmore. You got to make sure you say the second R, Swarthmore.
The extra R in there, the Swarthmore.
And then we just started University of Toledo end of this month, and then really interesting. The ones I'm excited about, all clients are my favorite, of course, but the ones that are going to be interesting this summer is that we have this convergence of 3 institutions that are on a early-ish stage of combining alumni engagement and annual giving into the same shop under the same leader: NC State, Syracuse, and Indiana University, and all 3 schools I'm working with. And I want to have like a part focus group, part therapy session with those 3 leaders who are all dealing with some of the same issues. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, and actually, I was speaking with a friend, Kim Infanti at Syracuse, and you're doing like a retreat with
Yeah,
them in the middle of the summer. I know you often do retreats, workshops, that type of thing. In your recent experience, how are you hearing goals, initiatives around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging initiatives? Where are they in the conversation? Are they still really important? Do you feel as though things have it's less important than it was a couple years ago? Like where do you get the temperature read on that?
I think our expert coming on going to be the right person to have this conversation with and see how Angelique feels about this. But my perspective is it's become more important, frankly, over the last several years. I'm hearing it more and more. Often you see it lie. So we do strategic planning, for example, in a retreat format. We'll talk about values, vision, mission, priorities, guiding principles, and there's all kinds of language we use in it. But often you'll see it in values. People will have either DEI, DEIB, or some version of that, and they're sort of starting out saying this is important to everything we do. So at the very top. But we also see schools who will list it as a priority and say, of all the 5 things we want to do, this is a kind of a vertical. I think of it as a visual, like on a vertical pillar of a priority of work we want to get done. And then the other schools will say, we're not going to make it a priority. We're going to have these other 4 priorities. But we're going to have this, what I call an enabler or a guiding principle, cut across all 4 of those priorities and make sure DEIB is present in all 4 of the things we're focused on. So I see both versions of it, even values. I have one institution who did a project where it was in their values, it was in their priorities, and it was also an enabler cutting across everything they did. It was that important. So my short answer to you is it's more than ever on the front burner for folks to talk about. So let's bring on our expert.
More integrated, more layered within the strategic plan, more emphasized in hiring decisions and throughout programming. I think you're right. Let's go ahead and bring Dr. Angelique Grant out. Hello.
Here she is.
Grant, how are you?
There. I'm good. How are you?
Good to see you.
Dr. Angelique Grant is the senior consultant and principal at the inclusion firm. It is lovely to have you on Alumless with us. You work with advancement teams all the time at various stages of development when it comes to their DEIB programs. What are the most advanced teams doing successfully, would you say?
Great question, Ryan. And it's so interesting because oftentimes we get the question, who's doing it well, right? And we have to say there's no one perfect organization, just like we're not perfect individuals, if you may, right? We have great characteristics and qualities, but no perfect organization. So really to answer your question about, what are some of the most, advanced teams who are doing it well, I'd have to say they're the ones who are really acknowledging and addressing the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, right? Most teams have realized that DE&I is really a necessary part of our society with the changing student and alumni demographics. Years ago, I can recall talking to organizations saying how even within our workforce, we're going to transition from millennials, Gen Z, Gen Y, from 40% representation to, well, it was 25%, 40%, and it's going to increase to about 75% within the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Right. So then those who are understanding that cultural internal dynamic must change because of that, because they, define DE&I quite differently, and really take that time to look inwardly. And when I say looking inwardly, it's with sort of conducting or making sure that you have a DEI assessment, in conjunction or combined with your employee engagement, if you may.
Ryan, if you don't mind, I'm going to take us off script just for a second. I have the prerogative to do that, Angelique.
You do. It's your show.
But this is an easy one for you. Give us 2 minutes on the inclusion firm, the work you do, sort of the scope of how you approach and what you work with clients on typically.
Absolutely. So we're a national consulting practice that focuses on integrating diversity, equity, inclusion into nonprofit organizational environments. We do have a couple campaign companies who are clients, as well as one government agency, which is the CDC. But it's about what does it look like and how is it integrated into your environment, both from a workplace standpoint and especially with that externally facing lens, because as nonprofit professionals, especially in advancement, we are an externally facing sort of profession.
Right.
Yeah. Not all universities, right? You mentioned a bunch of other clients and in the nonprofit sector.
Yeah, higher ed, a lot of higher ed, because clients, because we've spent our time in higher ed, and a lot of our senior consultants work for higher education advancement shops, if you may, and especially the diversity, equity, inclusion in advancement book that was published by Case, me co-authoring. Absolutely, a lot of clients there.
Well, that's your compensation for this gig. By the way, Angelique, you get a 2-minute commercial on the.
Everyone's already Googled the inclusion.
Right. It's already up
over here.
Ding, ding, ding.
Well, so when you do those assessments, Angelique, you go in and you're going to be asking a series of questions, right, to get a sense of where every organization is on some of these central questions that sort of give you an idea where that organization is so that you can provide that as a report card, What are some of the questions that you ask that you want to know from advancement leaders sort of about how they're thinking about DEIB?
No, absolutely. So to take a quick step back, when you have an assessment, right, we all know that DE&I is present, right? Understanding when and how it shows up in behavior is important, because we always talk about awareness to action. You can be aware, you need to understand when and how it shows up, hence the importance of the assessment, and then adapting it and developing sort of behavioral change, right? In all of your areas within advancement stewardship, alumni relations, databases, et cetera, et cetera. So it's important to understand sort of the purpose of it, right? So when working with leaders and asking specifically, I always start off in terms of how are you defining DE&I? Because back in the day, I'm a Gen Xer. I don't know about you all. We won't talk about ages. But baby boomers, Gen Xers, we define, it used to be D&I back in the day, but it used to be race and ethnicity and gender identity. Because the workforce has changed, because society has changed, we're talking about more identity aspects, whether it's cognitive, sexual orientation, most definitely defining diversity from ability, religion, political influence, and so forth, right? How are you defining it from an organizational leadership standpoint? And what does that mean to you in terms of success? Like, what does success look like, right? We want to be inclusive, absolutely. But really unpacking that with leaders, in addition to also understanding how it shows up on a day-to-day basis. What we saw, I wouldn't say many years ago, and even sometimes, here, is that people are looking at DE&I as an add-on activity versus it being integrated. And that's what we are really good at. I have to make time to talk about DE&I, or adding it to agenda, and it's oftentimes the last agenda item, and then we run out of time, and then we don't get to it quite. Yeah. But where, how are you prioritizing? How are you investing in it? Why is it important? And I'm oftentimes seeing with some clients and nonprofits, organizations across the country, it's really understanding from their lens who should own DE&I, if you may. So having a conversation with leadership, and sometimes it's what you hear and what you don't hear, and the words that come out may not necessarily come out explicitly. But oftentimes we may see DEI councils wait for leadership for their priorities and how they're defining it, and then vice versa. When in actual, it's all our responsibility.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so Chris, I mean, it's fair to say that those organizations that have made inroads, right, are the ones that have more integrated approaches to DEI, right? That it is more than just setting aside the last agenda item, right? It is actually part of the culture of the organization. Where have you seen, I guess, sort of following up on that concept, Chris, sort of the integration component, and maybe Angelique, you can comment on this too, so what are some of the dynamics at play that showcase to you that this idea of integration, and when you look at a shop, you're like, okay, that's really a school that sort of stands out?
I won't name any specific schools, but I'll tell you a few generalities that I've seen, Angelique, because there are places that are struggling or challenged by this. And for me, I actually think it starts with, there's that overall commitment, and it becomes part of everything you do. It's not the last item on the agenda. That's sort of a cultural shift. It takes leadership to get it moving that way. The next step for me, though, which I think is staffing. If you don't have a diverse staff, you're going to have a really hard time. It's not impossible, but it's just certainly harder to build diversity in your programming and have diverse programs out there and know what those audiences are looking for from a programming standpoint. So I always look at staffing makeup. And if you see a very similar looking staff across the board, they're going to have a harder time implementing this, because most of these institutions we're working with, I'm sure, Angelique, true for you, have a much more diverse current student body and the more recent graduates. The older alums may look more homogenous and be okay with the traditional format and programming that we're putting out there. But our younger alums and our current students, especially who will soon be alums, are much more diverse than ever before, and our staff have to reflect that. And that's the beginning of the journey, to be able to understand what the audience is looking for and to get it right. Angelique, I'd love to hear you comment on this. I'm sure you have lots of thoughts.
I agree with you on that. Looking at every department within advancement, stewardship, marketing, communication, prospect analytics, how does DE&I weave throughout? Are you having team conversations about what are your goals, objectives? What's important to us? Having that not only become an agenda item, but it's a way of life, right? Mm-hmm. And to Chris's point, right, when you have staff who are diverse, thought, background,
always, right.
visible and invisible characteristics, it oozes through. That's how it becomes integrated.
So what do you say to advancement leaders? You probably find yourself giving the same advice often in different contexts, right? But you probably have some pretty common bits of advice that you suggest to advancement leaders in terms of how they prioritize things. What is that type of advice that you typically have? I know folks usually pay for that with you. But,
give a hint at it.
So this is a handout question. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about advice. I would say seek assistance, and to be quite frank. I know it's going to be.
That sounds like something Chris would say. Chris would say that exact response.
That's what a business owner would say. Pipeline development.
Yeah, you need help. That's the first step.
Well, because oftentimes we think that we can solve it ourselves, right? You find someone with lived experiences within your organization to help teach you and others internally with something that is very, it's embedded into organizational development and change management, right? The DE&I. We have a client where we're working solely on organizational development, and diversity, equity, inclusion components just ooze out of it, and it's all twined. It's not like, again, I don't want to hammer it and say, oh my goodness, it's this add-on and people see it. But that's when leaders really understand diversity, equity, inclusion. Diversity is counting heads, inclusion is making heads count. It can't sit off into the silo alone.
Say that again. That was really good.
Diversity is
counting heads, inclusion is making heads count.
Okay.
Yeah. So when looking for subject matter expertise, we can bring our lived experiences, but you also want to make sure that people are certified unconscious bias trainers, right? We have like 4 PhDs on our team, researchers who have led the DE&I and advancement sort of, for APRA, and then some, right? But what you do need to do is take that moment to create a plan, an actionable plan, just like you would approach a campaign, right? How would you approach anything else? If you were creating, let's say, an estate and gift planning program within your shop, what would you do, right? You create a plan, you invest in it, and you move forward with actionable items. You treat it the same exact way.
Could you share a story about a recent success story that you've had with a client, someone that you've been working with, and talk a little bit about some of their successful efforts to bring to life some of your recommendations?
Yeah, I would say right now, there are a few clients that we've worked with who are interested in going beyond like sort of performative change. A perfect example, based on our research, about 55% of relationship managers and gift officers have experienced inappropriate behavior from external constituents, right? Prospects, alumni, donors, etc. And we've had this significant increase in clients who are interested in navigating challenging conversations with alumni and donors, right? We provided that sort of professional development. We've seen it at conferences. We've all talked about it. In fact, we've been doing it for 5 years, and et cetera, right? When you look at it from that lens, addressing and making sure that you're providing some attention to your team in terms of where we are in society, because it's challenging to engage with constituents who are making or providing microaggressions or saying microaggressions because it's not only verbal but it's also physical, right? Sexual harassment, homophobic sort of comments, right? Providing that training to your team, but coupling it, if you may, with the infrastructure. And those clients who are successful at it know that it's not only being supportive of your team, but what can we do in terms of an infrastructure to support our staff to communicate that it's unacceptable? Do we have a zero tolerance policy? Have we built sort of policies and processes, whether it's a code of conduct that we are publicizing during homecoming weekend, where we have a lot of events where people are drinking and enjoying themselves, but really setting parameters. And are our relationship managers, do they understand that they're supported so that they can be comfortable talking about DE&I, comfortable interacting with external constituents, but also knowing that they're supported by leadership at the same time? Those are the organizations who are taking the time to say, times have changed, right? We can't do things like we used to do over the years, but how do we take a step back and really approach it from a meaningful and thoughtful way and not necessarily transactional?
Yeah. And, I think the conversation continues when we think not just about the way we're developing our teams and the culture internally, but also the partnerships with alumni volunteers. There's another whole sort of area to be considerate of, right, when it comes to developing these cultures. And, Chris, I think one of the ways that we often bring to life different partnerships in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives is through partnerships with different groups, right? Maybe this is a Black Alumni Association, for example, that is an affiliate organization of the university. What do you see as the role of, an optimum partnership maybe that exists between a group like perhaps a Black Alumni Association, for example, and the university?
Yeah, groups is, as you said, it's been the avenue. But before I go into my answer, I noticed there's a bunch of activity in the chat. If you're listening and you want to ask Dr. Grant a question, now's your chance. Put it in and we'll ask your question. Curveball or slow pitch, whatever you want. We're going to give her the question that you pop. First one in the chat gets their question answered. And I'll make one up if no one shows up.
Good news, we have a whole script of questions too.
Yeah, we do. I drive Ryan crazy. I go off script every now and then, Angelique. So, but on the groups, I was at a I won't say the name of the school. So it was a elite private institution, board meeting, really good school, alumni board meeting I'm talking about here. And they were talking about this topic of groups and affinities and identity groups, where do we put our time and effort? Do we focus on a regional? Is it dividing by zip code? Is it dividing by their identities? Is it dividing by class year? And there was a question from the group about, I don't understand why people just don't show up because it's blank institution. Why is it just not enough? And my response was, and in the room was a DEI expert. So I was asked the question. So I answered it like this. And I said, please give us the real answer. And she actually agreed mostly with me on this, which was that, if we raise the flag of blank university and say, come up underneath it and join us under this tent, you'll get people who come out and will be comfortable in that environment and won't feel like they're part of that. If you raise the flag that says your class year, my 35th reunion is happening right now over the hill from where I sit right now. And people will come out for their class year. Most of my efforts around my affinity, which is around athletics and swimming. But there's still a lot of people who won't come out. Those flags don't attract them. They aren't drawn under that tent. And I said, sometimes it takes the Black alumni flag, the Latinx flag, the LGBT flag to go up to get people to come out. And if we don't commit to doing that, we're going to still have the same traditional audiences we've always had coming up to our class events or regional events or our watch parties and our tailgates, and not have enough space for the people who want to come up under a different flag. That's how I think of it in these terms. So, Angelique, please tell me right or wrong. I want to hear your response.
Yeah, I know. I agree with you. I attended an HBCU, historically Black college and university undergrad, and a predominantly white institution. So I understand it from both perspectives, right? And as a BIPOC alumni, right? Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC, if you've heard the term, you're proud, but oftentimes ignored, right? There's this perception that the institution has And this is also based on some of our assessments with alumni, BIPOC alumni, that they've ignored the struggles and experiences of diverse alums, right? And they felt that they couldn't be really their full authentic selves as students. So then when going directly into engagement, it's like, okay, we're just going to ignore that. And then we want you to show up. Like you said, raise the flag. Just because you have an event doesn't necessarily mean I have to show up.
Exactly.
Right? Yep. Is the event really acknowledging something that I can identify with in terms of my experience? Are you reaching out to me because it's sort of the thing to look for and bring back and engage diverse alums as a result, because then I may then feel tokenized, right? And then when I do attend an event, am I going to feel like an outsider, which I've heard a lot of diverse alums say that oftentimes. And then when institutions do reach out, there's this perception that they're only interested in their dollars and not necessarily their experiences.
And the raising of the flag, metaphorically, right away you think of an event, but I also, when I say that, I mean how we communicate with how we set up mentorship relationships and all the things that go with it. If the flags are always the ones we've always done, you're going to get a decent response from us audience you can predict. But when we start to think about other ways we segment and approach and organize our teams around specific identity groups, you're going to get different people who show up for different reasons. I 100% agree with you. Yeah. There's a good question in the chat, Ryan. You want to ask Priya's question?
Yeah, absolutely. Priya asks, besides hiring more diverse staff, what else can you do to help shift culture?
I would also take a look at your retention efforts. Retention really drives recruitment, to be quite frank, because if you're not enjoying the time, and clearly oftentimes we focus on diverse professionals in the workplace, but all professionals, right? When you're in the recruitment process and candidates are asking you specific questions about why are you there, how has the organization provided you professional development, opportunities. If you can't answer that, recruiting may then shifts it on the other side, which then really is an indicator of what the internal culture is like. So everything from having a voice to are we provided these opportunities to network within our organizational environment? What about work-life balance, accommodations? There are just a wealth of organizational culture sort of components that you can take a look at to improve what that may look like.
We are going to keep the conversation going in our bonus section. We're going to hit on some of the headwinds that may exist, I think, when it comes to, how these narratives around diversity, equity, inclusion are being pushed against in certain areas. And we're going to explore many more topics with Dr. Grant in our bonus section. But before we sign off and wish everyone a very fantastic weekend, Chris, could you share who is joining us on the next episode?
I'm going to tease one topic I'm going to go off script on in the bonus section to get people listening now to join us for that, which is this. Dr. Grant, I want to talk to you about these topics and how they play out in the states of Texas and Florida, and increasingly so the state of North Carolina. I'm starting to see this sort of bubble up as well. How do we handle these issues? Let's get political in the second half of this, all right?
Well, that's how I was going with it, but you made it very much clearer than I did.
That's it, man. I want to make sure we get there. But our next guest is going to be really fun. We're going to go overseas to Christine Fairchild from Oxford University. Christine just announced in the last week or so that she is stepping down from her role. She didn't want to say retiring. She's going to find her next thing, but she, after a long career, a long stint at Oxford, arguably one of the best alumni programs, certainly one of the best universities in the world, she'll be our guest, joining us for 2 weeks from today. It's help me out, June 23rd. So
June 23rd. We are looking forward to chatting with Christine about her tenure at Oxford and what she's imagining comes next, not just for her, but for University of Oxford as well. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Thanks to the great group that joined us in the chat that said hello. For Dr. Grant, we'll continue the conversation with you in just a moment. But to our live viewing audience, thanks a lot. And we'll see you on the podcast. And then again, back here, 11:30, 2 weeks from today. Have a good weekend. Bye.
See you, everybody.